Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to this All Things Policy episode. Today I have with me Uday Vijayan, who's the Managing Trustee and President of Beyond Carlton, a citizen-led fire safety initiative that was established after the 2010 Carlton Towers fire tragedy in Bangalore. Beyond Carlton aims to promote fire safety through awareness, advocacy, and accountability. They have developed a fire safety blueprint as well for Bangalore. So I'm in conversation with Uday, and I'm Sowmya Prabhakar, COO at the Takshashila Institution. Welcome, Uday, to this podcast.
Thank you for having me here.
Pleasure having you here. And just a primer to what we're going to dwell into, from towering high rises to crowded neighborhoods, fire safety is one of those silent concerns that only gets attention when a tragedy strikes. But if we flip the script and asked not just who's to blame, but what can be done, right? That's what we're going to talk about in this episode. We take a deep dive into fire safety in India, not just the technical checklist, but as a lens to understand how the society, government, and markets interact. How do actually communities respond to fire drills, or schools and resident welfare associations? Are they doing enough? What's the role of policy, enforcement, and urban planning? And of course, tech and insurance becoming the game changers in this sector that often wakes up too late, right? We are unpacking lived experiences, gaps in the system, and the sparks of hope through the citizen action, responsible governance, and private sector innovation. So stay with us to go deeper into this. So we talk about from a society point of view, Uday. If we had to focus on people and citizen action and awareness, what is the societal response been to fire safety in India?
So I think it's good you're starting there. Honestly, I think that's a bit of a dampener in our efforts of 15 years at Beyond Carlton. For no other reason, because I think we Indians culturally believe nothing will happen to us.
Yeah.
Not just fires, but if you kind of look at, for example, riding down the street or driving down the street, you'll see the guy on a motorcycle, and guess where the helmet is? On his arm rather than on his head.
Right.
That, I think, itself tells you a story about how little we actually place a premium for our own lives. And just as an aside, I'd actually put together a little piece along with a professor of IIM Bangalore on this cultural aspect of why we Indians don't take our own lives seriously. We believe we are all immortal, and we believe we'll live forever. But unfortunately, that's not true. So there is an issue, and that's one of our biggest challenges. I mean, our own experience coming to fire safety has been that in the initial years when we started, we obviously had this outreach program that we'd go into apartments on a Sunday, get the fire services to come, do a demo, and guess who'd show up? It would be the cook, the maid, and the driver, and not somebody who lived in those high-rise apartments of 10, 15 floors at that point of time. And honestly, it wasn't inspiring for a fledgling, not-for-profit kind of entity that we were, to even take things beyond. But I think there's a huge apathy. There's this huge apathy within us citizens, not just in Bangalore, but anywhere in India, that fires are not something that I will ever go through. And so did the 9 lives that lost their lives in Carlton in 2010 believe so, I guess. That they'll never ever be in their life seeing a fire accident of sorts.
Right.
But it could happen to anyone.
Yeah, rightly so. In terms of apathy, we recently did another episode, Uday, on the aging community, right? How we don't see elderly people around, and I think we cheat them of having a life outside of their safe buildings, right? So beyond a building, which is a residential community or a gated community, everything seems intact, but you step out of that gate and it's a mess, right? So building upon that, how has the response been, like in terms of, say, fire safety drills itself in resident welfare associations or schools? They play a very important role, right, in terms of prevention. So how has that been?
So what we learned from what I just mentioned is that maybe it's not the right thing to go and actually talk to the resident. So we actually got into partnership with the Bangalore Apartments Federation, BAF as they call it, has about 1,200 apartments across Bangalore.
Right.
And the two of us believed that rather than trying to go to a resident, every large scale community has somebody known as an estate manager of sorts. I mean, he's a one individual or three individuals, depending on the size of the facility.
Right.
And most often he ends up becoming the first responder to a fire. And we said, why don't we actually go out and train them? So we actually run every quarter a program with BAF, where we've, I think, covered now 300 plus estate managers in the city who have gone through both fire safety as well as CPR.
Okay.
Along with the Manipal Foundation. So we brought in the Manipal Foundation because they're experts on that. And we also believe that maybe, offering a little more value than just fire safety may interest people.
Right.
So we've trained these 300 plus estate managers now in the city who can, hopefully help with, in case there's a fire, be a little more knowledgeable than they were before.
Okay, interesting. So mostly in the households, Uday, what has been the reason why fire incidents actually happen?
So there are 2-3 things that we've noticed. And incidentally, fires in residences are one of the largest causes of fires in the country today. Residential fires happen to occupy a large portion. So obvious is LPG and gas. Cooking gas is one of the largest, let's say, possible reasons for fatalities that happen. The other bit is also, we've noticed a lot of diya fires, which means that, at a prayer room, there is a diya that we all light at homes.
Yeah.
And we wear synthetic outfits, be it a chunni of a lady or a sari, which is synthetic. It catches fire immediately, and we don't notice it because it would be somewhere at the below.
Right.
And, injuries and fatalities due to fires in homes is quite large due to diya fires too. Of course, during Deepavali, it's even more. There are eye injuries that happen, and there's stuff around burns that happen at that point of time. So these are some of the causes for fires at residences, LPG being one of the significant ones there.
Right. Is there any data, Uday, in terms of how these numbers look like, even for home incidents like LPG, gas?
So I can just share some numbers with you.
Sure.
Just something that we had put together. So if you take LPG, for example, and this is as per NCRB 2022, which is the last reported data that one has. So there were 1,468 fatalities, let's say, due to electrical fires. And this electrical fires could be residential electrical fires as well as commercial electrical fires.
Yeah.
Now, coming to your question of how many LPG were there were 1,564 people who passed away due to let's say, a residential fire. And actually, this was due to cooking gas. And 984 of them were women in that case, which is expectedly so to a large extent, right? Whereas in the electrical fires, there were 1,221 men who passed away due to an electrical fire. Again, seems kind of logical in the way people are occupied in various places.
Correct. So, given these incidents, right, like I was also discussing with you about the whole incident of the RCB celebration in Bangalore, just thinking proactively, were there ways to kind of mitigate, or we as citizens are aware that how do you actually manage yourself in a setup like a stampede? Like, was there something on the civic consciousness itself, right, that we could...
Yeah, so it's so ironical. About a year before the accident happened, some citizen wrote to us not with a stampede like RCB winning, but what if there was a fire and evacuation had to be done? So Beyond Carlton actually wrote to the DGP Fire at that time saying, can you please address this?
Right.
We've got a citizen's comment that's come to us, and I think evacuating 35,000 people out of a stadium, God forbid, if there's a fire which is raging, could be horrendous. So honestly, we didn't hear back from the fire services whether something would have been done. But obviously, going back to the recent incident, I think it's more to do with crowd management. I think we're not great experts with that as a nation. Not just here. I mean, we've heard of so many stampedes that have happened on railway platforms and various other highly populous areas within the country. And I think that's something that maybe the NDMA or somebody else needs to put some things in order in terms of how do you do crowd management where there's large number of people. It's not 100 odd people in a large facility. It's a huge facility, but 3 times the number of people who are supposed to be there, or 4 times or so, one hears, right? And sometimes I feel, and I go back to Carlton too, I think sometimes everything that has to go wrong goes wrong, It's a systemic failure. If you go back to even Chinnaswamy on the day of the accident here, the stampede here, I think while there's obviously, it's being investigated upon through people who matter, but it does look from the outside that, lots of things weren't complied with, But I think we'll know the honest truth once the reports are out.
Yeah. And also, just being aware that, being pushed against walls, or just having this thing of, locking yourself to some extent, maybe, if people are trained, plus thinking about other political rallies and everything that's happened in Bangalore, maybe just getting the team to make a tour around Bangalore would have just given more space for the celebration. But this is more like an afterthought.
Yeah, more like an afterthought. So, but going back, you go back to other congregations of large people. Look at Tirupati.
Yeah.
Where they manage crowds.
Yeah.
Right? There have been incidents of stampede and other things, but more often than not, they seem to have learned it. While we may hate the waiting periods that we all have before we enter the Sanctum Sanctorum.
Right.
I think there are a few islands of our own learnings, and we've managed to figure out how to manage things. And Tirupati is possibly a fairly decent example of how we manage lakhs and lakhs of people who show up there.
True. Totally. So let's bring the focus into, say, the policy enforcement or even urban planning, Uday. So how responsive are the fire departments to public demands of, say, safety audits, maybe?
So I don't know, I'll kind of rewind a little to the PIL we had filed in 2011. And I'll just give you a bit of a reason why we filed it. It's just kind of digressing for a moment. It happened a few months after the incident, and like a true parent, I went to the fire services and said, why couldn't you save my son? I didn't have answers for that. And the then chief, the director in charge, told me something which shook me, beyond what I could imagine. He said, I'm not empowered to enter a building in Karnataka. I said, what do you mean? You're the fire services chief. How are you saying that the fire department doesn't have the powers? And that's when he said, I would be seen as trespassing, much like you would be if I entered any building and asked for something to be checked. And that's really was the origins of our PIL. And thanks to support from the Bengaluru Foundation, we actually filed the PIL. And some of our asks in the prayer was that there should be periodic inspections, because another learning that we got in the year, 1 year after the incident, was most of the violations of a building happen after occupancy.
Oh.
So I'm talking about commercial commercial buildings too. So you come in, you get the occupation certificate, obviously, which would have got a fire NOC.
Yeah.
And then once people start staying there or occupying it, the sprinklers are removed, the false ceilings are put. And that's really when we said, hey, listen, we can go and file a PL and say we need a clearance certificate once in its lifetime of a building, which Carlton incidentally had when they originally built the building.
Okay.
But what we insisted upon, and the courts were gracious enough to grant this, was that every 2 years, the high-rise building at that point of time, 15 meters and above, had to be inspected by the fire services.
Okay.
To make sure that, it's still complying in some way.
Okay.
And I think that to an extent got people who initially didn't like what we had done. I mean, we got lots of calls of people saying, why did you do this? The fire guys are after us and stuff like that. But in retrospect, I think we were able to make a difference to the state. And remember, this law is across Karnataka. It's not just Bangalore.
Yeah.
So Mangalore, Mysore, Hubli, Dharwad, all have to comply with this now.
Right.
And we've suddenly felt that a legal intervention is possibly a quicker way to create local impact or on-the-ground impact, And I still believe so. I mean, not that we filed many PILs after that, but I still feel that is possibly the best way to have it done. And therefore, there is a lot more compliance now. Initially, there wasn't.
Okay.
What we're also noticing is newer buildings, buildings that have been built in the last 10 years or so. You will notice, even if you drive past, and I haven't gone obviously and had the powers to enter a building and check whether it's compliant, but even if you drive past, there are something known as set-offs that have to be given around the building, which means it's a set-off of space that you set off for fire hydrants to come in, or fire trucks to come in.
Okay.
Now, including the case of Carlton, they're going to put generators there, right?
Okay.
So people never followed that. But now when you drive past, and maybe because I'm interested, I look around, you will find those open spaces around large buildings that exist. And there are even boards which says, as per instructions of the fire department, you're not supposed to park.
Park here, right.
I happen to see it at Manipal Cunningham Road, right? Or Millers Road. So I think slowly things are beginning to change. I mean, somewhere I think we're making some slight shift of the needle.
No, I think much required, right, for a society also. Okay. So what are the gaps in, say, enforcement or implementation or fire safety norms that you see?
So while we may have done what we did, one is to have a law, the other is to be able to implement it.
Right. Yeah.
And with lakhs and lakhs of high-rise buildings, even in a city like Bangalore, implementation is the biggest challenge, right? So we keep asking, obviously, the fire services, how many have you inspected, right? And they can't not say no to us.
Right, yeah.
We actually filed a PIL a year later to see how many buildings they have inspected, right? So that's one way of putting pressure back on the service.
Yeah.
While it's a bit of a carrot and stick approach that we follow, right? And I think clearly from a situation where they didn't have an inspection department in the fire services, and people came and thanked me for now, getting motorcycles and, Jeeps and other things, thanks to the fact that they now have an inspection department 11 years ago or 12 years ago. Now I think there's a lot more inspections that are happening.
Okay.
But like with anything good that you do, there's also a bit of a bad. So we do get people calling and saying, hey, listen, guys are asking for all kinds of things, So I'm saying it hurts because we did it with the best of intentions as beyond Carlton. But sometimes the way the human mind works is something that some of us can't control on a daily, hourly basis. But we've taken it up. We've raised it with people that matter, saying, this should not be done. It's people's safety, right, at the end of it all.
Yeah. Okay. So if we compare the standards globally, where are we on that? There?
I think we're pretty poor. I wouldn't be hesitant to say that. I'll give you a recent example. I know you had a chance to see a high-rise building in Dubai that caught fire about a week ago, 10 days ago, I think. There were, I think, 3,000 apartments in that building or 3,000 residents in that building. And there was not a single fatality. I mean, it's amazing. And it was an inferno. It wasn't smoke like in Carlton that killed people. here it was an inferno that was raging. And Dubai, to me, is a classic example of how to manage fires and fire safety. I mean, they're a city's government which really does it so well.
Yeah.
It's quite amazing in the way they're very conscious of taking care of fires and fire accidents that could happen. They obviously have it right. And I'd urge all fire services, if any of them are listening to this podcast of sorts, to use them as a role model. I mean, go there, figure out what they're doing right.
Yeah.
Try and implement some of the easier things. I know we have resource challenges in India, but maybe there's simple things that they do which we can also start implementing here without much burden.
Yeah, totally. I think, when we see and experience, maybe, because otherwise, a lot of times people don't really, like for me, for example, because there are kids around and, elderly care is a huge responsibility. I have the first thing that I will step into a place and I'd be like, okay, the restrooms are here. Where are the fire exits? Because there are a lot of times they need assistance in, taking the lift or sometimes taking, a safer way to get across. But that comes just because I have people around me who need that care.
Yes.
But
But I love the way you said fire exits.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always gratifying to hear a citizen saying that to us because we of course observe it, right? I mean, because we are in the space. But I'm so glad to hear that you look for fire exits too. I mean, it's quite natural what you are doing. I mean, in a sense, you do notice now, for example, you enter a mall, you see a lot more fire exits around the place and stuff like that, which never existed before. We do have challenges. Even in a mall, you'll find, a fire exit is supposed to be open 24/7, nothing to be stored near it because you can never predict a fire, right? And people need to run and evacuate themselves. So there's just no way you can have big packaging material kept next to the fire exit, right? So those challenges exist. It's a long journey, but I think it's a marathon we're running.
Yeah, totally. No, but I've also told people, like in my corporate experience also, that all of us should try to use the stairway so that there is some familiarity, there is some orientation to it, right? Because otherwise it's, of course, for fitness, there are a lot of people tell, okay, I need to take the stairs. But I'm like, just being aware that, these many steps are there and just being fit enough, right, to get past the whole thing.
But just a word of caution, I mean, a message to your listeners is that obviously, and you've seen these signages, and I'm presuming there's fair awareness to this, but don't ever get into a lift. In case of a fire. In Carlton, we lost 2 people inside a lift in that incident. So that's a death trap of sorts. But of course, if there are fire-safe lifts, that's different. I mean, there are some, more modern high-rise buildings which have fire-safe lifts too. Then that's obviously a protected lift of sorts. But you would see signage around saying don't use a lift in case of a fire. And that's where the challenges of the seniors, the elders, and how do you manage them comes to play.
True. Yeah, but like we were just talking before this recording started, Uday, the whole thing of confidence, right? Like, I know that we can freeze in panic moments and it's only but natural. But just the thing that we did recently, I was telling you about, being able to get down the ladder, like just about 2 floors above the thing, meant a little bit of a push. Although you feel like you can do it, there is something that stops you. There was no panic, but still it stopped me from like taking that first step. But then I was okay. But that's what I keep thinking, maybe we should do more frequently so that you get past that fear totally.
So we'd encourage, if not a quarterly, but at least a half-yearly mock kind of drill in all high rises. I mean, the RWA themselves can decide to do it, get it done, either with the support of the fire department or reach out to Beyond Carlton, and we can help in some way. But I think it's important because at the end, let's not kid ourselves. It's our own lives. Just be selfish about your own life. That's all I'm saying.
But like, what systemic changes do you believe could significantly improve this fire safety?
So then, if you really look at the state of fire safety in India, and incidentally, we just published a report that we hope to do year on year on our 15th year, which was in February. And again, a first of its kind of in the country, where we feel that there is huge gaps from a budgetary perspective. I mean, in a sense, most fire departments don't have funds to put behind fire safety infrastructure.
Okay.
So take the case of fire stations. We do not have as many fire stations that a city like Bangalore requires. We're grossly under capacity on number of fire stations. Take the number of vehicles you require. We're grossly, meaning I'm talking about fire trucks and other things. So there's a huge gap in terms of what's required and what actually exists. The other is manpower. Fire departments are grossly understaffed, right? It's not a sexy place to be in, being in the fire services, unlike in the West. In the US, the fire department guys are treated like heroes, which is what we are trying to do. We recognize for 15 years, we recognize firemen from the Karnataka fire department because nobody does. No citizen's body even puts them up on a pedestal, but they are the guys who saved your life. He may have done his little bit, but I think we need to be able to help him. So I think those are the huge gaps that exist. The second aspect is, I think, most of them are primarily focused around firefighting rather than fire prevention. If we make that shift towards fire prevention, from a fire services point of view, or fire department point of view, I think that itself will be a recognizable shift that we will start seeing.
Totally. So how are the markets playing out in terms of, say, innovation or some tech-related thing that's happening in the context of fire?
Yeah, I mean, there are obviously better firefighting equipment that's currently available globally, as well as, I mean, you would have possibly seen drones being used in some parts of the world to fight fires in high-rise buildings. I'm not sure, but I do think a couple of fire departments in the country have started using some of it. There's robos being used by the Mumbai Fire Department, where a man can't go in, they send it in to fight a fire, because remember, closed environments, which are fire-related, we can't send out a fireman to go and fight it. And therefore, there are the interventions of technology that are coming in, but I think we have a long way to go as a nation, and unless there's a push and and let's say familiarity with it or a welcoming aspect of it from guys who sit at the top who make strategic decisions within fire departments, I think that's going to be the long journey that we will have.
Okay. But are there the incentives that exist at all to make this work?
As far as I know, there isn't any incentive.
Okay. But if you had to look at, say, alert systems or, fire insurance or even an IoT-based intervention, what's actually worked?
So there was somebody who runs a very interesting thing who met me recently, and he's doing it at hospitals. Because hospitals are very vulnerable spaces that we all know. People are in ICUs, and if you remember, during the COVID time, there were a lot of fires that happened in hospitals. And that was due to the oxygen that was there, and stuff like that. Plus ICU machines running 24/7, large numbers, right? So he has actually come up with something very interesting. He's Bangalore-based and reached out to Beyond Carlton, wanting to share what he's done, not to, commercially for us to propose it or, do anything about it. But I found it very interesting. It's a heat sensor. And apparently quite a few hospitals in Bangalore have started adopting that. So, in the moment the heat goes above a certain temperature, it sends out the alarms are engineered, right? So obviously it's a preventive measure. It takes care of it well before it's into an inferno, maybe. And they all also know that there are certain areas where this could happen within a hospital premises.
Okay.
What I was delighted to hear from him is he's actually working with the Indian Railways to implement a system like this on the railway carriages.
Wonderful.
I thought that's wonderful, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I've read of so many fires.
Correct.
Yeah. So I think they're pretty, I mean, to see it being done by an Indian company itself made me feel good.
Yeah.
And I think it's very valuable. I mean, may not be so much, you can't put it in a residential thing because remember, all our kitchens are forever high.
Yeah.
So this thing would be really yeah, but in commercial spaces, which is what he and I were saying, maybe it's a little more relevant and could be used. So I was nudging him saying, let's do something for residential too.
Yeah.
Because residential fires are huge. So he said, sure.
Absolutely. So the safety blueprint of sorts, right? Are states adopting it? What does the
like I mentioned to you, there was Karnataka that obviously has it. We've been pushing them for a version 2.0. Hasn't seen the light of day as yet. But what we learned out of Karnataka, which we took to Odisha when they said Bhubaneswar and Cuttack. So the first 2 years we focused on just Bhubaneswar and Cuttack.
Okay.
And then they signed a fresh MOU with us saying it should be across the state with you, right? So what we learned out of Karnataka is there are many stakeholders in a city environment that could play a role to prevent a fire. And I'll give you examples.
Sure.
Of course, the fire services is one which goes after a fire has happened more often than not. But there are, for example, BESCOM in Bangalore. There's the BBMP. And the equivalents of this in every state in India, as we know. Right? Then there's, for example, architects. There are builders. There are hospitals. Now, how do we bring them all together and try and see the larger vision and then split it into various areas that we want to focus on? That's what we did in Bhubaneswar and Cuttack. So we formed a body which had the commissioner of the Bhubaneswar Corporation as part of it, of course the fire chief of Odisha, the disaster management authority which was driving this whole thing, OSDMA. And I think every month we would meet on a table and say, what is the progress we made here in each of your areas? What have you done about fires and fire safety? So Odisha as a state is quite admirable because remember, they've done a marvelous job around cyclones. So they're pretty good at, they're specialists with disaster management in my mind, relatively. And therefore, they were able to see what we had done here and say, hey, that's very interesting. We should bring it in here. So I think this multi-stakeholder approach that we took to Odisha is possibly something that I would urge other state governments, if any of them happen to listen to your podcast. And we do it all pro bono. We don't charge a penny for this because finally our purpose is not to, it's to really make India safe in some way. So we don't charge Odisha, we don't charge Karnataka, and hopefully, other states will follow.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to go about it, right? And like you rightly put it, Uday, I've seen that Orissa has picked up on all fronts, in terms of sports, education, to anything like this, with very progressive in that sense. So how are insurance companies, navigating through this? Are they pushing for safer buildings at all?
Well, yes, I think if you had to get a fire policy, for sure, they would want certain, let's say, items to be ticked in the list of the checklist of sorts. So in some sense, yes, there is pressure from insurance companies, because otherwise you won't get a fire policy, right? So we've tried to engage with IRDA / individual fire insurance companies, but we haven't had much success in terms of engagement as yet. But the hope is that we will, try and work in with them because it's a common purpose. They want to obviously not keep doling out for insurance loss of some sort, and we want to make sure it's safe in some way. So I think they should be a very vested interest party, if I should call it that.
One thing I forgot to check was mostly in the states, right? We did discuss about it before the podcast began. Like 6 states are the ones who are already. So can you share that? That will be interesting for our audience.
So, I mean, there's again, basis the NCRB 2022 data. So 52% of all deaths by fire are from just 5 states. And this is just 1 year data I'm talking about. That's Odisha, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Chhattisgarh, and Tamil Nadu.
Okay.
So these 5 states are about 52% of all fatalities that happened in that year prior to 2020.
And just curious to also know, are there places which take care of, say, the burns and the thing that happens, right? I see a lack of it, but I don't know if it's
So
just
that's the
assumption.
most depressing situation that we have. Burn care is something that honestly hasn't gone very far in India. And, we weren't, to be honest, focused around burn care at all as Beyond Carlton. But then suddenly we realized that, listen, there can't be a burn without a fire. And in some sense, it kind of meets our larger objective of what we want to do, because that's the final impact of a fire incident, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know whether you're aware or your listeners are aware, but in case, God forbid, you do have a burn through a fire, there are only 2 hospitals in Bangalore that you can go to. One is Victoria and the other is St. John's.
Yeah.
And St. John's itself has a very limited number of beds that they have to offer. So we have actually initiated a collaboration with the Victoria Hospital. This is between Beyond Carlton and Victoria Hospital Burn Center. As part of a CSR project, we call it Fire Watch 101.
Okay.
Where we want to support patients with burn injuries. A lot of these patients come in from underprivileged backgrounds and smaller towns around Bangalore and districts. Remember, they don't have anything.
Yeah.
So they have to be transported from the districts into Bangalore to Victoria. And we have helped treat 222 patients thanks to a CSR project that we did with a company called TD Power Systems, again Bangalore-based, as part of their CSR initiative. So we're working very closely with the Victoria Hospital Burn Center and try and do our little bit of trying to support these people who have, and burn care is extremely expensive.
Yeah.
Which is part of the reason people don't come out of it, because there's no support at all medically that people can afford to have. So that's one initiative that we've taken, and burns are a big challenge.
Yeah. In fact, rehabilitation is something that I have closely watched, and I realize, as much as for health we indicate that preventive is better than the rehab side of it. I know somebody who works at the burn center, and she tells me that you really need to be mentally so strong to just work around that system. And it
is quite I think it can shake you. Visually shake, because you see it in a visual form, and it's not pleasant at all.
So, Uday, if you had to have, like, say, a 3-pronged strategy for, say, the government, markets, and society, and especially in the context of Bangalore, what would that strategy look like?
Should I take each separately?
However.
Let's take government, for example. They're the policymakers, plus they're the lawmakers there. And, we reach out to the lawmakers, as in, guys from various functions, for no other reason, because we believe that we need to carry everybody along, right? So we, for example, made a plea with the government to set up a burn center in every district of Karnataka.
Okay.
I was promised that by the then Deputy Chief Minister who was there. But unfortunately, I don't think that's seen the light of day. So what can government do, I think, is to be able to look at public safety as a larger issue. Fire is one aspect of it, but there are other issues. There could be road safety, fire safety, lift safety, all kinds of things. As we're growing, and, with the crore plus population in Bangalore, for example, right now, I think urban infrastructure is breaking at its seams. So I think you need visionaries within government who are able to turn around and say, how do I plan for 5 years hence, 10 years hence, 15 years hence? Because people from the smaller towns are going to come here for employment. You and I can't stop it, right? So coming back to fire, I think if they could look at what ails currently our situation, and we'd be more than happy to actually participate with them, guide them, help them understand, because we invested 15 years in the space. And work with them to try and say, let's focus on these three things. I think one is clearly infrastructure, as I was mentioning around fire safety. I'd say we need to up it very, very quickly. The other is training. I think our forces within the fire services need far better modern training that is required. And the third is implementation of even the existing laws. We have laws as a nation. We have laws for everything, right? It's a question of the gap between what law exists and how do I get it to work on the ground.
Right.
That's the big challenge.
Thanks so much, Uday. Is there anything else that we missed talking about, or if you feel you'd like to, have a closure?
Just a little. Just stay safe. My message to everyone who's hopefully listens to this. And should there be anything anyone requires around fire safety, do just reach out to us at Beyond Carlton. We try and do whatever best we can do. And we'll keep plugging away as long as we can.
Thanks so much, Uday. I think, we heard from you, fire safety is not like a department's job, right? It's a collective action and responsibility. And how our buildings are designed and how our citizens respond in emergencies, every link in the chain actually matters finally, right? And but awareness alone isn't enough. I think our policies, tech, like you said, some nice, smarter tech developed in India is emerging, and regular drills. I think as long as we don't show lethargy there and take it seriously, that cultural shift that places would care for in terms of safety will evolve. And of course, planning, participation is all part of it. But until that happens, I think, fire safety will still be on the reactive mode and not preventive. So let's hope that this conversation has helped people rethink that. And I'm sure this episode with the RWAs or the schools or offices or anybody who's listening will start that dialogue, because sometimes I think what saves lives is not just like a sprinkler, right? It's the mindset of how you approach it itself. So thanks for your time and wonderful interacting with you.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.